During Christmas dinner at my son-in-law's house, I started feeling sick, so I went to get some water. What I saw in the kitchen made me call 911. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now, let me tell you my story. The perfection of my daughter's house was a kind of violence. It was a flawless, glossy magazine cover of a life, and on this Christmas day, the performance was at its peak. Every surface in Naomi and Julian's magnificent home was a carefully curated vignette of holiday cheer. A towering fir tree, decorated in a severe but elegant theme of white and silver, stood sentinel in the two-story living room. The air was thick with the scent of pine, roasted turkey, and the subtle, expensive perfume of Naomi's potpourri. As a retired social worker, I've spent a lifetime in spaces that were the opposite of this. I've sat in cluttered, chaotic living rooms filled with the messy, unfiltered reality of human struggle. I am, by nature and by training, a student of the authentic, and the oppressive, sterile perfection of my daughter's home always set my teeth on edge. Naomi, my only child, was the high priestess of this temple of appearances. She floated through the rooms in a cream-colored cashmere dress, her face a mask of bright, brittle cheerfulness, her every movement a study in practiced grace. She was an interior designer, and her own home was her greatest and most stressful project. "Mom, are you okay? You look a little flushed," she said, her hand fluttering near my arm but not quite touching it. Her concern, as always, felt less like love and more like quality control. A flushed mother was a flaw in the perfect picture. "I'm fine, darling," I said, forcing a smile. "Just a little warm with the fire." The truth was, the stress of these perfect family holidays always took a toll on me. I was 68, a widow with a heart condition that was managed with medication and a quiet, low-stress life. But Naomi's frantic pursuit of perfection created a vortex of anxiety that was impossible to escape. My heart, a fussy, unreliable organ, was already beginning to flutter in my chest, a familiar, unwelcome rhythm. My son-in-law, Julian, was the charismatic co-host of this performance. A handsome, smooth-talking financial advisor, he was the very picture of success. He moved through the room with a glass of scotch in his hand, his laughter a little too loud, his charm a little too bright. He was a man who was always selling something, and today he was selling the image of the perfect, happy, and immensely successful family man. The guests, a collection of other picture-perfect couples, murmured their appreciation. "Naomi, the house is just breathtaking. Julian, that wine is superb." It was a symphony of mutual admiration, a performance in which everyone played their part. I sat in a stiff, uncomfortable armchair, a silent observer, and I felt a profound and deeply lonely sense of unease. My social worker's mind, the part that was trained to see the cracks in the facade, the subtle tells of dysfunction beneath the surface, was on high alert. Something, in this perfect house, on this perfect day, was profoundly and terribly wrong. The first, concrete sign that my unease was not just my imagination was the man sitting across the dining room table from me. He was not a family member, he was not one of Naomi's design clients, or a friend from the golf club. His name, Julian had announced with a strained, false cheerfulness, was Marcus Thorne, a business associate who at the last minute had found himself with nowhere else to go for the holiday. The explanation was thin, and the man himself was a gaping wound in the festive fabric of the day. Marcus Thorne was a man who did not belong at a Christmas dinner. He was in his mid-40s, dressed in an impeccably tailored but somber dark suit that looked more appropriate for a funeral. He was handsome, in a cold, predatory way, with eyes that were as flat and gray as a winter sky. He did not smile. He did not engage in the light, cheerful banter that flowed around the table. He sat with a coiled, unnerving stillness, a black hole of energy in a room that was desperately trying to be bright. His presence cast a palpable chill over the meal. The conversation, which had been so effervescent, became stilted and awkward. People avoided making eye contact with him. He was a shark in a swimming pool, and everyone on some primal level seemed to understand that. Everyone, that is, except my daughter. Naomi, in her single-minded pursuit of the perfect Christmas, seemed either unable or unwilling to see the profound wrongness of his presence. She would direct bright, cheerful questions at him. "So Marcus, what is it you do exactly?" And he would respond with a single clipped non-answer: "Investments." But it was his interaction with my son-in-law that was the most telling. Julian, usually so confident and expansive, was a different man in Marcus's presence. He was a nervous, sweating wreck, His charming smile was a tight, strained rictus. His hand when he reached for his wine glass trembled slightly. He kept shooting quick, terrified, sidelong glances at Marcus, like a schoolboy checking for the approval of a feared headmaster. Marcus, for his part, seemed to take a quiet, cruel pleasure in Julian's discomfort. He would hold Julian's gaze for a moment too long, a small, cold smirk playing on his lips. He was not a guest, he was a warden, and my son-in-law was his prisoner. My social worker's radar, the finely tuned instrument that had spent a lifetime detecting the subtle power dynamics of abuse and coercion, was screaming. This was not a business relationship. This was a predator and his prey. The story about Marcus having nowhere else to go was a lie. He was here for a reason. He was here to ensure that my son-in-law did not forget something, did not deviate from some unspoken and deeply unpleasant agreement. The perfect Christmas dinner was not a celebration. It was a hostage situation. As the dinner progressed, the silent, invisible war between Julian and Marcus escalated. The tension at the table became a thick, suffocating thing, a high-frequency hum that only I seemed to be able to hear. Naomi, in her bubble of willful obliviousness, kept up a frantic, cheerful monologue about her recent design projects. The other guests, picking up on the strange, tense energy, responded with polite, monosyllabic answers, their eyes darting nervously between the two men. The battle was fought in the spaces between words. Julian would tell a charming, well-rehearsed anecdote about a recent business trip, his voice a little too loud, his laughter a little too forced. And Marcus would just watch him, his cold gray eyes unblinking, a small knowing smirk on his face. The smirk was a silent, brutal commentary. It said, "You are a fraud, and I own you." With every passing minute, Julian's composure crumbled. A thin sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead. He kept loosening the knot of his expensive silk tie, as if it were a noose. He was a man performing a high-wire act with no net, and he was beginning to lose his balance. The stress, the silent, screaming tension in the room began to work on me physically. The familiar, unwelcome flutter in my chest, the one my cardiologist had warned me about, started up. It was a light, feathery sensation at first, like a trapped bird beating its wings against my ribs, but as the silent war at the table raged on, the fluttering grew stronger, more insistent. A wave of dizziness washed over me. The beautifully decorated dining room with its glittering crystal and candlelight seemed to sway slightly, the edges of my vision blurring. A cold, clammy nausea began to creep up from my stomach. I took a sip of my wine, hoping to calm myself, but the wine itself tasted strange, sharp and slightly bitter. A flavor I didn't recognize. I pushed the glass away, my nausea intensifying. I knew these symptoms. They were the warning signs my body gave me when it was under too much duress. It was my heart, my fussy, unreliable heart, protesting the toxic atmosphere of the room. I needed to get away. I needed to find a quiet space, to take my medication, to breathe. I placed my napkin on the table, the simple, graceful movement a monumental effort of will. "If you'll all excuse me," I said, my voice a little weaker, a little more breathless than I would have liked. "I'm not feeling entirely well. I think I just need a glass of water and a bit of fresh air." Naomi looked at me, a flash of pure, unadulterated annoyance in her eyes. My sudden illness was an unwelcome, unplanned improvisation in her perfect play. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked, her concern, as always, laced with a sharp, impatient edge. "I'm fine, dear," I said, pushing my chair back slowly. "I'll be right back." As I stood, the room tilted again, more violently this time. I had to grip the back of my chair to steady myself. The sickness was real. It was a physical manifestation of the poison that was circulating at this table, and I had to escape it. I made my way out of the dining room, my movements slow and slightly unsteady. The concerned and, in my daughter's case, irritated eyes of the dinner guests followed me. I did not care. My own well-being for the first time that day had to take precedence over the preservation of Naomi's perfect Christmas. My excuse was a plausible one, a story that was, in its essence, true. I did need a glass of water, and I did need to escape the suffocating high-stakes drama of that dining room. The kitchen, a large, beautiful and currently empty gourmet space, seemed like the perfect, quiet sanctuary. I walked down the short, tastefully decorated hallway that connected the dining room to the back of the house. As I walked, I placed a hand on my chest. The fluttering had subsided, replaced by a dull, heavy ache, another familiar and deeply unwelcome symptom. I fumbled in the small evening bag I carried and my fingers found the small silver pillbox that was my constant companion. I needed water and I needed it now. The kitchen was separated from the hallway by a swinging restaurant-style door. An affectation of Julian's, who fancied himself a gourmet chef. As I reached for the polished brass handle, a wave of dizziness, more intense than any before, washed over me. The beautifully papered walls of the hallway seemed to ripple and contract. I leaned against the doorframe for a moment, my eyes closed, waiting for the world to stop spinning. My professional life had been spent dealing with crises, with walking into chaotic, often dangerous situations and imposing a sense of calm and order. But my own physical vulnerability was a different kind of crisis. It was an internal betrayal, a reminder of my own fragility. At 68, I was no longer the tireless, unflappable woman I had once been. I was a widow with a heart condition, a guest in my daughter's house, and I felt in that moment profoundly and terrifyingly alone. I took a few deep, steadying breaths, the simple meditative act of familiar anchor in the storm. The dizziness subsided slightly. I just needed to get to the sink, to get a glass of water, to take my pill, then I could retreat to a quiet bathroom, splash some cold water on my face, and compose myself before returning to the performance. My hand reached for the door. My retreat to the kitchen was not just a practical necessity, it was a desperate flight to safety. An escape from a situation that was becoming for me physically dangerous. The irony that I was fleeing one danger only to walk directly into the heart of a far greater and far more monstrous one, would not become clear for another few moments. As my hand rested on the cool brass plate of the swinging door, I heard them. The voices from within the kitchen were low, hushed and vibrating with a raw, vicious anger that was a shocking contrast to the polite, strained murmur of the dining room. It was Julian and Marcus. They must have excused themselves from the table moments after I had, under some other pretext. I froze, my hand still on the door. My first instinct was one of polite, social decorum. I did not want to interrupt what was clearly a serious and intensely private conversation. I was about to back away, to retreat to a different room, when I heard my son-in-law's voice, and the sound of it made the hair on my arms stand on end. It was not the smooth, charming, confident voice of Julian Croft, the successful financial advisor. It was the voice of a man I had never heard before, a thin, reedy, and utterly terrified whimper. "I can't, Marcus," he was pleading, his voice a raw, desperate whisper. "I won't. You can't ask me to do this." "I am not asking you," Marcus's voice replied, and it was a sound of pure cold menace. It was a low, sibilant hiss, the sound of a snake in the quiet, sterile kitchen. "I am telling you, you are out of time. You are out of options." My social worker's mind, the part of me that was a professional analyst of human conflict, took over. I was no longer a guest, about to intrude, I was a witness. I stood perfectly still, my ear close to the crack in the door, and I listened. "The money is gone, Julian," Marcus continued, his voice a low, brutal litany of my son-in-law's failures. "The Malaysian deal collapsed. The crypto fund was a bust. You have lost everything. Not just your own money, my money, and more importantly, my investors' money. And my investors," he paused, his voice dropping even lower, becoming even more dangerous, "are not patient men, they are not forgiving men." I heard a sound, a soft thud, as if something had been placed on the large marble island in the center of the kitchen. "So you are going to fix this," Marcus hissed. "Tonight, you are going to get me the capital I need to placate these people, or the consequences will be biblical. For you, for your pretty wife, for your children." It was a threat, a direct and utterly chilling threat against my daughter, against my grandchildren. The vague sense of unease I had felt all evening now crystallized into a cold, hard, and terrifying certainty. This was not a business dispute. This was something far darker. This was a man's life, a family's safety, on the line. And I, a woman with a fluttering heart and a desperate need for a glass of water, was the only one who was listening. Just as I was about to back away, to flee from the terrible knowledge I had just acquired, another wave of dizziness, stronger and more sickening than any before, washed over me. The hallway tilted violently. A black starry curtain began to descend over the edges of my vision. I knew this feeling. It was a vasovagal response, a sudden drop in my heart rate and blood pressure, a direct physical result of the extreme stress of the past few minutes. I was going to faint. My hand, which had been frozen on the door, acted on its own, a desperate, instinctual grab for stability. I pushed the swinging door open just enough to lurch into the kitchen, my body desperate for something, anything to hold on to. The scene that met my eyes was a tableau from a nightmare, a silent, terrible drama unfolding under the bright, track-lit ceiling of the gourmet kitchen. Julian was backed up against the far side of the marble island, his handsome face a pale, sweating mask of pure abject terror. His charming, confident persona had been completely stripped away, leaving behind a terrified, cornered man. His eyes were wide, his mouth slightly agape, his hands held up in a futile, pleading gesture. And standing over him, leaning across the island, was Marcus. He was no longer the quiet, brooding guest. He was a predator, his face a mask of cold, predatory rage. He was the embodiment of menace. But it was what was on the island between them that made my blood run cold, that turned the scene from one of intimidation to one of imminent and lethal danger. There, on the pristine white marble surface, next to a discarded bowl of cranberry sauce and a stack of clean dessert plates, lay two small, clinical and utterly horrifying objects. One was a small glass vial, the kind used for medical injections, filled with a clear, colorless liquid. The other was a small, disposable syringe, still in its sterile plastic wrapper. They were so small, so out of place in this beautiful domestic space. They were instruments of a different, colder world, a world of medicine, of science, of life and death. And in this context, in the hands of this menacing man, they could only mean one thing. I had pushed the door open only a few inches, and my entrance had been silent, masked by the low, angry hum of their conversation. They had not seen me, they had not heard me. I was a silent, unseen witness to a scene that was so far beyond my comprehension, so far beyond the realm of a simple family Christmas, that for a moment my mind refused to process it. A vial, a syringe, a terrified man, and his tormentor. The perfect, beautiful facade of my daughter's life had just been ripped away, revealing a dark and potentially murderous reality churning just beneath its glossy surface. I was frozen in the small gap of the doorway, hidden in the shadows of the hallway, my mind struggling to make sense of the horrifying tableau in front of me. Marcus, seeing the look of utter terror and indecision on Julian's face, decided to clarify his instructions, to spell out the monstrous choice he was presenting. He picked up the small glass vial, holding it up to the light between his thumb and forefinger. The clear liquid inside seemed to catch the bright clinical light of the kitchen, making it glitter. "You're out of time, Julian," Marcus hissed, his voice a low, venomous whisper that cut through the silence of the kitchen. "I told you my investors are not patient men. They do not accept excuses. They only accept returns, or collateral." He let the word collateral hang in the air for a moment, a veiled but utterly chilling threat against Naomi and the children. "So," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, becoming even more menacing, "you are going to fix this. Tonight, you are going to create a new investment opportunity for us." He gave a short, ugly, humorless laugh. "An inheritance." He held up the vial. "So you're going to use this. You know who this is for? The old woman, your mother-in-law." Me? The words were a physical blow, a punch to the gut that knocked all the air from my lungs. I was not just a witness to this nightmare, I was its intended victim. "Her heart condition," Marcus said, his voice a cold, clinical calculation. "It's perfect. A small, untraceable push in her wine is all it needs. A little potassium chloride. It'll just look like she had another one of her episodes. A tragic but not entirely unexpected holiday accident. No one will ever know. No one will even ask for an autopsy." He knew about my heart condition. Of course he knew. He had done his research. This was not a spontaneous, desperate plan. This was a cold, calculated and well-thought-out conspiracy to commit murder. My murder. And then, Marcus continued, his voice a purr of pure psychopathic logic. "Your pretty wife, her only child, inherits everything. The house, the portfolio, the art collection, a multi-million-dollar estate. And you as her loving husband will have access to all of it. You will pay me back. You will pay back my investors, and you will have more than enough left over to continue living this beautiful, pathetic lie of a life you've built." The full monstrous shape of the plan was laid bare. This was not just about the debt. This was about my entire fortune. They were not just trying to silence a creditor. They were planning a hostile takeover of my entire estate. And I was the only obstacle. Julian stared at the vial in Marcus's hand as if it were a venomous snake. His face, which had been pale with terror, was now a ghastly greenish-white. The full monstrous weight of what was being asked of him had finally and completely crashed down upon him. "No," he whispered, the word a small choked sound of pure visceral horror. "No, Marcus, please, not this, not her. She's a good woman. She's my wife's mother." He was shaking his head, a frantic, desperate, pleading gesture. "I can get you the money another way. I swear. I have another deal, a real estate venture. It's about to close. Just give me another week. 2 weeks. Marcus laughed. It was not a sound of humor. It was a short, ugly and utterly dismissive bark of a sound. "Your other ways are gone, Julian. Your deals are a fantasy. I have been patient. My investors have been patient. Our patience has run out." He set the vial down on the marble counter with a sharp, definitive click. He then picked up the sterile, plastic-wrapped syringe. He tore it open with his teeth and slid the syringe out. The small, sharp needle glinted under the kitchen lights. "This is not a negotiation," Marcus said, his voice now completely devoid of any emotion. It was the flat, dead tone of a man giving a final, irrevocable order. "This is the solution. It is the only solution left on the table." He held out the syringe to Julian. "So you have a choice. A simple, binary choice. You can be the smart, loyal husband who saves his family, or you can be the sentimental fool who condemns them." He leaned in closer, his voice a final, venomous whisper. "Do it. Or the debt gets collected from your pretty wife and your beautiful children, piece by piece. I promise you, what will happen to them will be far, far worse than a quiet, painless little heart attack for an old woman who has already lived a full life. Your choice, Julian. Their future or hers." He placed the syringe on the counter next to the vial and took a step back, his arms crossed. A judge who had just delivered a death sentence and was now waiting for the executioner to do his work. Julian stared at the two objects on the counter. The vial, the syringe, the instruments of my murder. He was a man trapped in an impossible, monstrous choice. A choice between becoming a murderer or sacrificing his own family to the wolves. And in that moment, I saw the full, terrifying and deeply tragic truth of my son-in-law. He was not a villain. He was just a weak, terrified man who had made a deal with the devil, and the devil had finally come to collect his due. I stumbled back from the door, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a cry. The dizziness was gone, replaced by a surge of pure, ice-cold adrenaline. The world, which had been spinning and tilting, was now stark, sharp and horrifyingly clear. The social worker in me, the part of my mind that was trained to step back, to analyze, to diagnose a crisis, took over. It was a desperate act of self-preservation, a way to process a reality that was too monstrous to comprehend on a purely emotional level. I was no longer Eleanor Vance, the terrified mother-in-law. I was Dr. Vance, a retired social worker, assessing a high-risk domestic situation, and my diagnosis was swift, clinical and absolute. Subject A, Julian Croft. My son-in-law. My initial assessment of him as a charming but weak man was correct, but incomplete. He was not a perpetrator of evil, but a victim of it. He was a man drowning in debt and desperation, a man who had clearly made a deal with a predator to maintain the fragile illusion of his success. He was now being coerced, under a direct and credible threat of violence against his own family, to commit murder. He was not a willing co-conspirator. He was a hostage, being forced to participate in his own, and my destruction. Subject B, Marcus Thorne, the business associate. My initial assessment of him as a dangerous presence was a catastrophic understatement. He was not just a creditor, he was a predator of the highest order, a man who operated entirely outside the bounds of law and morality. He was exhibiting classic signs of antisocial personality disorder, a complete lack of empathy, a grandiose sense of entitlement, a facility for manipulation, and a propensity for violence. He was not a guest in this house, he was an invader. The situation. This was no longer a simple business dispute. This was a case of extortion, coercion, and a direct, credible conspiracy to commit murder. The presence of the poison in the syringe elevated the situation to one of imminent, life-threatening danger. The immediate victims, my daughter Naomi, and my grandchildren, were the primary leverage in this situation, their safety the tool being used to coerce Julian. They were in immediate, though unknowing danger from Marcus and his unseen investors. The primary target, me. I was the target of the murder plot, the obstacle to be removed, the asset to be liquidated. My mind, trained to assess risk and formulate an action plan, raced through the options. Option 1. Confrontation. I could storm into the kitchen, reveal that I had heard everything. The likely outcome: Marcus, a man clearly capable of violence, would be cornered. He might panic. He might try to silence me, the sole witness, immediately. The risk to my own life was unacceptably high. Option 2. Warn Julian. I could try to get a message to. Option 3. External intervention. The only logical, rational, and safe course of action. I had to alert the authorities. I had to bring a more powerful, more organized force into this situation, a force that could counteract the threat posed by Marcus. My diagnosis was made. My action plan was clear. I had to get to a phone. I had to get to a safe place. And I had to call 911. The time for being a polite, accommodating dinner guest was over. It was time to be a social worker. It was time to save my family. As I backed away from the kitchen door, my mind racing with the cold, clinical logic of my action plan, a new and even more terrifying thought inserted itself into my consciousness. It was a memory, a sensory detail from just a few minutes before, and it landed in my mind with the force of a physical blow. My sickness, the dizziness, the nausea, the flutter in my chest, I had attributed it to the stress of the evening, a flare-up of my known heart condition. But what if it was? I thought of the wine, my wine glass which had been refilled by Julian halfway through the main course. I remembered taking a sip, and the taste, it had been strange, a little sharp, a little bitter, a taste I had dismissed as an odd note in an unfamiliar vintage. My God, had they already done it? Had that first bitter sip of wine not been wine at all? Had it been the opening move, a smaller preliminary dose designed to trigger my symptoms, to make a fatal heart attack later in the evening seem more plausible, more natural? The thought was so monstrous, so utterly diabolical, that for a moment I felt my knees buckle. I leaned against the cool, smooth wall of the hallway, my hand pressed to my chest, not in a gesture of cardiac distress, but in one of pure, unadulterated horror. My own sickness, the very thing that had given me the excuse to leave the table, the very thing that had led me to this terrible discovery, might have been the first stage of my own murder. I was not just a future target. I might already be a victim in progress. The realization reframed the entire evening. Julian's sweating, his trembling hands, was it just fear of Marcus, or was it the guilt of a man who had already committed an unconscionable act? His constant nervous refilling of my wine glass, was it the act of a good host or a man trying to ensure his victim consumed the poison? I stumbled away from the kitchen, my mind a chaotic swirl of paranoia and a new terrifying urgency. I could not trust my own body. I could not trust anything I had eaten or drunk in this house. The flutter in my chest, which I had thought was a symptom of stress, now felt like the ticking of a clock, a countdown to my own demise. I was a character in a Gothic novel, a guest in a beautiful, perfect house where the hosts were secretly trying to kill me. The sinister realization added a new and deeply personal layer of terror to the situation. I was not just a witness to a crime in the making. I was the crime, and I had to get out, not just to save my family but to save myself. My first instinct was to run for the front door, to flee into the cold, safe anonymity of the night. But my social worker's mind, the part of me that was still miraculously functioning with a cold, clear logic, stopped me. If I ran, they would know I had heard. Marcus, a man who had just calmly ordered my murder, would not simply let a witness escape. He would come after me. I needed a sanctuary, a place where I could lock the door, catch my breath, and make the most important phone call of my life. I bypassed the main family bathroom in the hallway. It was too close, too exposed. Instead, I made my way, my steps a silent, terrified tiptoe on the polished hardwood floors, to the small downstairs guest bedroom at the front of the house. It was a room rarely used, a quiet, forgotten corner of this house of lies. I slipped inside, my hand shaking so badly I could barely turn the old-fashioned brass lock on the door. The soft, solid click of the lock sliding into place was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I was safe, if only for a few moments. The room was dark, lit only by the faint, cold glow of the Christmas lights from the neighbor's house across the street. I leaned my back against the locked door, my breath coming in ragged, painful sobs. I fumbled in my small evening bag, my fingers closing around the cool, smooth shape of my cell phone. My hands were trembling so violently I could barely unlock the screen. I swiped, my thumb slipping twice before I could get to the keypad. I pressed the 3 numbers, 911, each one a monumental effort of will. The voice on the other end was a calm female operator. 911, what is your emergency? I had to force the words out, my voice a shaky, breathless whisper. My name is Eleanor Vance, I began, my training kicking in, the need for clarity overriding the panic. I am at 450 Crestview Drive. I need the police. Immediately. Okay ma'am, stay calm, the operator said, her voice a soothing professional balm. Can you tell me what is happening? I have just witnessed a conspiracy to commit murder, I whispered, the words sounding insane, even to my own ears. There is a man in this house. He is threatening my family. He is trying to force my son-in-law to poison me. Poison, ma'am? The operator asked, her own voice now sharp with a new, urgent focus. Yes, I said, the words tumbling out in a frantic whispered rush. He has a vial, a syringe. He told him to put it in my wine. He said it would look like a heart attack. My heart. I have a heart condition, please. You have to believe me. Is the man armed, ma'am? Yes, I said, my voice cracking. He's armed with a syringe and what I believe to be poison. His name is Marcus Thorne. He is a guest at a Christmas dinner party. The absurdity of the situation, the juxtaposition of Christmas dinner and conspiracy to murder was not lost on me, even in my terror. Okay ma'am, the operator said, her voice now a calm rapid-fire series of commands. You did the right thing by calling. We are dispatching officers to your location now. They will arrive silently with no lights or sirens. Are you in a safe location? Yes, I whispered. I'm locked in a downstairs bedroom. Good. Do not leave that room. Do not make a sound. Do you understand? Yes? I said. Help is on the way, Mrs. Vance. She said, her voice a final firm reassurance. Just stay on the line with me. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor, my phone clutched in my trembling hands. The operator's calm, distant voice a thin, fragile thread connecting me to a world where Christmas dinners were not murder plots. A world that I prayed, with every fiber of my being, was on its way to save me. Mrs. Vance? Are you still with me? The operator's voice was a sharp, insistent presence in the dark, silent room. The officers are 2 minutes out. They need to know if you can get to the front door to let them in. No, I whispered, a fresh wave of panic washing over me. I can't. They'll see me. They'll know something is wrong. The operator was silent for a moment, clearly conferring with the dispatch team. Okay ma'am, she said. New plan. We need you to go back to the dinner party. We need you to act as if nothing has happened. Can you do that? It is crucial that they are not alerted to our presence until the officers are inside. Go back? The thought was terrifying. To go back into that room, to sit at that table, to look into the eyes of the man who had just ordered my murder, and the other man who was being forced to carry it out. It felt like an impossible, suicidal task. I don't know if I can, I stammered. You have to, Mrs. Vance, the operator said, her voice now a firm, urgent command. You are our only asset on the inside. You left the table because you were feeling ill. You need to return, looking a little better. You got a glass of water. You took an aspirin. You just needed a moment. Can you do that for us? I took a deep, shuddering breath. I was a social worker. I had spent a lifetime walking into volatile situations, of using my own calm to de-escalate, to control a room. This was just the most extreme version of that. I had to do it, for my daughter, for my grandchildren. Yes, I said, my voice a little stronger, a new, cold resolve beginning to form. Yes, I can do that. Good, she said. The officers will approach the front door in 90 seconds. They will knock. We need the door to be opened. We need our people to have eyes on the subjects. Just get back to the table. We'll handle the rest. I hung up. I stood up on shaky legs and walked over to the small, ensuite bathroom. I did not turn on the light. In the dim glow from the window, I looked at my own reflection in the mirror. I was a ghost, my face pale and spectral. I splashed some cold water on my face, the shock of it a welcome, grounding sensation. I took a few deep, steadying breaths. I composed my face into a mask of placid, grandmotherly calm. It was the performance of my life. I unlocked the bedroom door and stepped back out into the hallway. The house was quiet. I could hear the faint, cheerful murmur of conversation from the dining room. It was a sound that was now so deeply, profoundly sinister. It made my skin crawl. I walked toward the sound, my feet silent on the thick Persian runner. Every step was a monumental act of will. The few minutes it would take for the police to arrive now stretched before me like a vast, terrifying desert I had to cross. I was a soldier walking back into the line of fire, armed with nothing but a terrible secret and a desperate, fragile hope. I pushed open the swinging door to the dining room and stepped back into the lion's den. The scene was almost exactly as I had left it. The candlelight flickered, the crystal gleamed, and the low hum of polite, festive conversation filled the air. The perfect Christmas dinner was proceeding as if nothing had happened. Naomi looked up as I entered, her face a mask of polite, but slightly annoyed concern. "Mom, there you are. We were getting worried. Are you feeling better?" "Much better, thank you, dear," I said, my voice to my own astonishment. A calm, steady murmur. I just needed a moment to catch my breath. I made my way back to my chair, my movements slow and deliberate. Julian and Marcus were back at the table. Their faces, which I had just seen contorted with terror and menace in the kitchen, were now composed into masks of strained, holiday politeness. Julian wouldn't look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on his plate, his hands fidgeting with his napkin. He was a man being eaten alive by guilt and fear. Marcus, however, did look at me. His cold gray eyes met mine across the table, and his lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible and utterly chilling smile. It was a smile of a predator, checking on his prey. He was assessing me, looking for signs of suspicion, of knowledge. I met his gaze for a fraction of a second, then looked away, my own expression one of mild grandmotherly weariness. I did not let him see the terror. I did not let him see the loathing. I played my part. I was the old woman with the heart condition, feeling a little under the weather. I was a victim, but I was, as far as he knew, an oblivious one. The conversation, which had faltered upon my re-entry, resumed its banal, meaningless flow. Someone was talking about a ski trip to Aspen. Naomi was describing a new trendy color palette. It was all a surreal, meaningless noise, a soundtrack to the silent, screaming drama that was unfolding in my own head. My senses were on fire. Every detail of the room was now imbued with a terrible, sinister significance. The heavy, silver knife by Julian's plate. The rich red wine in my glass. The glass I now knew could have been a vessel for poison. The handsome, smiling face of my son-in-law. A face that was now the mask of a man being forced to become a murderer. I sat there, my hands clasped in my lap to keep them from shaking, and I waited. I counted the seconds in my head, each one a small, agonizing eternity. 60 seconds. 70. 80. Where were they? The mask of normalcy was beginning to feel impossibly heavy, the strain of this performance almost too much to bear. And then, I heard it. A sound that was both the most terrifying and the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. A polite but firm and very official knock at the front door. The knock at the front door was a sharp, percussive sound that cut through the low hum of the dinner party conversation. A sudden, expectant silence fell over the room. Naomi, a frown of pure, unadulterated annoyance on her face at this new, unwelcome interruption to her perfect evening, threw her napkin on the table. "Who on earth could that be at this hour on Christmas Day?" she muttered, pushing her chair back. "I'll get it," Julian said, his voice a little too quick, a little too eager to escape the suffocating confines of the dining room. He stood up, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. "No, you stay with your guests, darling," Naomi said, waving him back down. She was the mistress of this house, the director of this play, and she would be the one to deal with this off-script intrusion. She walked out of the dining room, her heels clicking an angry, impatient rhythm on the hardwood floor. We heard her voice from the entryway, a sharp, irritated "Can I help you?" The response was a low, male voice, too indistinct to make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was calm, professional, and utterly, unshakably official. A moment later, Naomi reappeared in the dining room doorway. Her face, which had been a mask of irritation, was now pale with confusion. And behind her, stepping into the warm, festive light of the dining room, were two calm, serious, and very large police officers. The arrival of the police into this scene of domestic upper-class perfection was so jarring, so completely out of context, that for a moment no one seemed to know how to react. The guests stared, their wine glasses frozen halfway to their lips. "I'm so sorry to interrupt your dinner, folks," the taller of the two officers said, his voice a polite but firm baritone. His eyes swept the room, taking in every detail, every face, before finally settling on me. "My name is Officer Riley. We received a 911 call from this residence, from a Mrs. Eleanor Vance. Is she here?" The silence in the room was now absolute, a heavy, suffocating thing. Every eye in the room, which had been on the officers, now swiveled to me. To quiet, frail, 68-year-old Eleanor, the woman who had just been the subject of their pitying, concerned glances. I had just become the center of a new and far more serious drama. The quiet arrival was over. The confrontation was about to begin. In the dead, profound silence of the dining room, I slowly, and with a hand that was now surprisingly steady, placed my napkin on the table and stood up. "I am Eleanor Vance," I said, my voice clear and firm, resonating in the hushed, expectant air. "I made the call." Naomi stared at me, her face a mask of utter, uncomprehending shock. "Mom? What are you talking about? A 911 call? Are you having another episode?" "I am not having an episode, Naomi," I said, my voice cold, cutting off her hysterical and deeply insulting assumption. I then turned my full attention to the police officers. "Officers, thank you for coming. I need you to listen to me very carefully. There is a man in this room who is a threat to myself and my family." I raised a trembling, but resolute finger and pointed directly at the man who had been, until a few hours ago, a complete stranger to me. "His name is Marcus Thorne. He is seated at the far end of the table." Marcus, who had been a statue of coiled, watchful stillness, now went rigid, his cold gray eyes narrowed into slits, his face a mask of pure, murderous fury. "This is insane," he hissed, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "The old woman is delirious." "I am not delirious," I said, my voice ringing with an authority that stunned the entire room, including myself. "I overheard Mr. Thorne in the kitchen, not 1 hour ago. He was threatening my son-in-law, Julian Croft. He was attempting to coerce him into poisoning me tonight, to make my death look like a heart attack so that he could gain access to my estate through my daughter." A collective, horrified gasp went through the room. My accusation, so monstrous, so specific, so utterly unbelievable, hung in the air like a poisonous gas. Marcus lunged to his feet, his chair crashing backward onto the floor. "She's lying. The crazy old bitch is lying," he roared, his mask of cold control finally and completely shattering. He took a step, not toward me but toward Julian, his intent clear. He was going to silence the only other witness. But it was too late. The two officers who had been watching the scene with a tense professional readiness moved with a swift, practiced efficiency. Officer Riley intercepted Marcus, his large frame a solid, immovable wall. The other officer moved to Julian's side, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. And Julian, my handsome, charming, and deeply broken son-in-law, the man who had been holding the terrible, monstrous secret all night, finally and completely broke down. He collapsed in his chair, his head in his hands, and a sound, a raw, ragged, and utterly heartbroken sob tore from his throat. "It's true," he wept, his voice muffled by his hands. "It's all true. The debt, the threats. He was going to hurt them. He was going to hurt Naomi and the kids. I didn't know what to do." His confession, a torrent of guilt, fear, and a profound and deeply, deeply grateful relief, came pouring out. He confessed everything: the catastrophic debt, the shady investments, the threats from Marcus and his unseen partners, and the final, terrible, murderous plot. The accusation had been made. The collapse was complete. The perfect Christmas dinner had just officially become a crime scene. The beautiful, perfect Christmas scene, which Naomi had so meticulously, so obsessively constructed, did not just crack, it disintegrated. It exploded into a chaotic, ugly, and deeply public spectacle of its own undoing. While Officer Riley was handcuffing a snarling, protesting Marcus, the other officer was speaking quietly and urgently into his radio. Within minutes, the quiet suburban street outside was no longer quiet. It was a chaotic swirl of flashing blue and red lights, the night alive with the sound of arriving police cars and eventually an ambulance, not for me but for my daughter, who had collapsed into a state of hysterical, disbelieving shock. The guests, the beautiful, successful people who had come to celebrate a perfect Christmas, were now witnesses, being separated and interviewed by grim-faced detectives in the pristine white and silver living room. The perfect facade had been shattered, and they were all for the first time seeing the raw, ugly reality that lay beneath. Marcus was taken away, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred, his eyes as they led him past me, promising a retribution that would never come. In his pocket, they found the vial and the syringe, the cold, hard, physical proof of the conspiracy I had overheard. And Julian, my son-in-law, my would-be murderer and my ultimate tragic victim, was also led away for questioning. He was not in handcuffs, but his wrists might as well have been bound by the weight of his own terrible choices. As he passed me, his face a wreck of tears and shame, he looked at me and his eyes were full of a terrible, profound, and deeply, deeply grateful clarity. He was ruined. He was disgraced, but he had been saved from becoming a monster, and he knew in that moment that I was the one who had saved him. I was left standing in the middle of the chaos, the flashing lights painting my face in garish strokes of red and blue. Naomi was being attended to by paramedics, her perfect world having so completely and so violently imploded that her mind had simply refused to process it. The beautiful house was no longer a home. It was a crime scene. The glittering decorations, the perfectly set table, the scent of pine and roasting turkey, it was all now just a grotesque, ironic backdrop to a story of desperation and of a murder that had been averted by a sick old woman who had just wanted a glass of water. I stood there, a strange, profound and deeply sorrowful calm settling over me. I had not just saved myself. I had saved them all. I had ripped away the beautiful, suffocating and deeply dishonest facade of their perfect life, and I had forced them in the most brutal way imaginable to finally and completely face the truth. The Christmas was ruined, the family was shattered, but in the wreckage there was, at long last, a chance for something real.